This week on the Hollywood in Toto podcast, actor Michael Rapaport shames Hollywood just days before the big Oscars telecast. We talked to filmmaker Andrea Mew about her new docuseries Cruel and Unusual Punishment, revealing the shocking details about women's prisons in California. And we review a remarkable new film from the team behind Sound of Freedom.
Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast. Entertainment news and reviews without the woke Hollywood narrative. Free speech, free expression. Now that's entertainment. And here's your host, award-winning film critic, Christian Toto.
Before we get going this week, I'd love it if you subscribe to the Hollywood in Toto podcast. We've got new episodes each Wednesday and plus bonus episodes coming in all the time. If you dig what you hear, could you give us a review over at iTunes? Every kind word helps. Or just like and subscribe. Do all the things. We appreciate it. You may not know actor Michael Rapaport by name, but you know his face. You've seen it again and again. He's been working for over 30 years now. He was in great dramas like Beautiful Girls. Oh, I love that movie. Also in TV shows like Justified, and more recently, a very good series called Atypical. You'll find that one on Netflix. And of course, he's from New York, so he's parlayed that moxie into a podcasting career, and he never holds back. This guy's got a lot of opinions. Sound familiar? He's even been calling President Trump pig. Well, I can't really finish the phrase, but he says it a lot, trust me. So you can probably guess about his politics, but not exactly. He does occasionally get away from the progressive plantation, but lately he's been doing much more than just that. Rapaport has been a relentless critic of Hamas and absolutely pro-Israel across the board on social media and elsewhere. He rages against anti-Semitism. He even traveled to Israel a few weeks ago to shoot a sketch that was mocking how the media covers Hamas in general. The actor, I must have went just back recently to Israel to shoot another sketch, and this one, oh my, this one's going to leave a mark. The actor stepped in for Jimmy Kimmel hosting the Oscars, and he started cracking wise during the telecast, like they do during the monologue sequence. Well, this wasn't like any monologue you'd ever hear at any award ceremony.
The 96th Academy Awards. Good evening to the millions of viewers at home and the 134 Israeli hostages who are watching us from the Hamas tunnels in Gaza. You guys have a lot in common with the beautiful audience we have here tonight. Neither of you have eaten in almost 4 months. Next year, I'm sure the hostage diet will be bigger than Ozempic. I can't believe it's already been 4 months. 4 months, which is actually the length of the first cut of Killers of the Flower Moon. I love you, Morgan. You're the best. I love you. Anyway, I know you beautiful people are thinking about the hostages in Gaza all the time. You just won't speak up about them. If Hamas would have attacked Israel and kidnapped all the dolphins, you'd be wearing dolphin helmets and throwing tuna fish at the podium. And God forbid Hamas would have raped the gender pay gap. Oh man, Julia Roberts would have ran into Gaza herself with an AK-47. Julia.
Brutal. Just brutal. And more or less accurate. Listen, Hollywood did this to themselves. They've been hyper-political for more than a decade now. They weigh in on everything. The latest elections, kids in cages, COVID shots, you name it. Trump is Hitler. We hear that a lot too. Yet when 1,200 Israelis were butchered by Hamas, the industry was more quiet than I think anyone expected. I know it's more than I expected. And for everyone like Rapaport or Patricia Heaton or Deborah Messing, who have been really vocal and very strong in condemning what happened, there are so many stars who have just been whisper quiet. But here's another part of the story. You heard part of that sketch. You think what he did, again, just about a week or so before the Oscar ceremony, will be all over the news. I mean, he's been a pretty famous actor for a while now. Actor scorches Hollywood. Just before they hand out their first Oscar statuette. Well, not really. The vast majority of media outlets ignored Rapaport in his sketch. In fact, my website, HollywoodInToto.com, plug alert, He's literally the only US-based news outlet to cover it. Doesn't it seem newsworthy? Oh, apparently not. Well, you know what? I beg to differ, and I bet you do too. Here's your movie trivia question of the week. In Quentin Tarantino's great Pulp Fiction, which I believe is about 30 years old now, John Travolta reminds us how good he is on the dance floor. Boy, if you haven't seen Saturday Night Fever in a while, go back and rewatch it. It is held up perfectly. Yes, disco is dated. The movie is perfect. But one of his signature dance moves in Pulp Fiction pays tribute to a classic 60s TV show. Can you name the show in question, or even the dance? The answer at the end of the show. Documentary filmmakers today, well, they spend as much time looking away as they do peering into the camera. There are so many topics they won't touch, they won't go near. Think about the chaos at the open border, Dr. Fauci's knack for bending the truth, and I am being kind, or even what's happening in the modern classroom. Well, it's opened the door to a new generation of filmmakers, and some of them really aren't filmmakers by trade. They're learning on the fly. They're trying out new topics and techniques. They are expressing themselves in a documentary format. It's amazing. And they're not afraid to tell the stories that others won't go near. That's exactly what Andrea Mew is doing right now. She's part of the Independent Women's Forum new series. It's called Cruel and Unusual Punishment. It looks at the California prison system and what female prisoners think of sharing space with trans women.
California has passed legislation allowing transgender inmates in the state's correctional facilities to be assigned housing based on their gender identity.
We were very nervous, angry. We weren't given a voice.
No one asked us how we felt about this. No one did.
In September, California Governor Gavin Newsom signed Senate Bill 132 into law.
As soon as the transfer started, there were people having sex on the yard, in the porta potties.
We're getting the predators, the sexual predators, people who have been incarcerated for rape, men who have been incarcerated for oral copulation, men who have been incarcerated for crimes against women.
California now joins Connecticut, Rhode Island.
Andrea talked about what she learned while making the docuseries, why the IWF is going headfirst into storytelling in this style, and also if Netflix might even try to scoop up the series. We need more storytellers like Andrea Mew, and I think you'll agree after hearing our conversation. Thanks again for joining the show. You know, episode 1 of your series features Jennifer Barula. Now, she was in a California prison. She dealt with life with trans prisoners. But how did you connect with her, and was she initially reticent to share her story, or is she just bursting and ready to share no matter the consequences?
Well, thank you for asking, Christian. It's very complicated trying to get in touch with women who are either currently or formerly incarcerated. But thankfully, Independent Women's Forum has been partnering with Amy Ichikawa over at Woman to Woman. And Amy is really on the front lines of this battle, essentially. She is the person who has been contacting the women who are currently incarcerated and also helping women who are just leaving prison right now. And through these, through picking them up for their parole hearings or, when they're leaving prison, she's heard a lot of the firsthand stories of what really happens behind bars. And of course, Amy actually does know quite a lot about what happens behind bars, having been formerly incarcerated herself. But she introduced us to Jennifer because we were really looking for stories, women who were okay with going on the record about the truth, because frankly, there are a lot of risks involved with speaking the truth about this issue. It's especially different for women in the carceral setting. You face legal risks. Obviously, you face emotional risks, especially if you're currently incarcerated. You might also face attempts on your life because, some of these women are in there out of gang affiliations. Some of the men that are behind bars with them are from rival or conflicting gangs. This is a complex issue, but Jennifer was willing to go on the record bravely and thankfully, because she really does feel for so many of the women who she said she left behind. Girls in there who might not be able to defend themselves like she felt like she could defend herself.
Yeah, she's a smart and apparently a scrapper. I mean, she sounds like she came from really a hard scrabble upbringing. One of the things that jumped out at me, and there's so much in this first episode, even though it's only about 8 or 9 minutes long, but was the change from women to incarcerated people. Now, we've seen some of this interesting labeling going on across the culture, and it's no accident. Can you expand on that a little bit and why that matters, rather than just a term used in a prison?
Right. So, there are really a lot of differences between men's facilities and women's facilities. And frankly, sometimes I feel like we should be saying female and male facilities because we're discussing sex rather than gender.
Mm-hmm.
And sex are these definable characteristics. We know that women have different chromosomes from men. We know that our bodies work differently from men. We know that our brains work differently from men. And for this reason, this is why the men's facilities are broken down in different ways than the women's facilities. They are organized on the yards differently. So some of in the case of the men, based on potentially their gang affiliation, they might be housed in a completely different yard from other men. In the women's facility, it's a little bit looser. Specifically in California, they follow a little bit of a different model that is focused on a lot more of, it's a lot nicer actually in the women's facilities, which some may say is a reason why some of the men are a little bit more eager to come into the women's facility. It is actually lauded by people who are in favor of this model as Prisneyland, a kind of joke name almost, prison in Disneyland, because the facilities are genuinely nicer than the women's facilities. They're safer. You can get a lot more in terms of different types of care if you're a transgender identifying inmate, a male identifying as a transgender woman. There's just a lot more that's provided for you.
When you think about this series overall, you enter it with a certain mindset, you expect certain things, but then you do your research, you speak to the women that you've spoken to for this particular project. What were some of the bigger surprises that maybe we won't see them yet? Maybe this will be clear in future installments. So I don't want to give too much away, but just as someone, as a producer, as someone enmeshed in this series and story, what shocked you about this that you didn't see coming?
I mean, there are a lot of shocks, and we will get into them as the series progresses. Obviously, in terms of physical and emotional trauma and abuse, there's also a lot at stake in terms of the legal complications. From what I've been discovering is that several of the men identifying as transgender women are very litigious in nature. And what they'll do is if someone speaks out, and this is according to one of our interviewees who will be featured very soon, what they'll do is if you speak out against them, they will try to retaliate against you. They will try to get you sent to what they call administrative segregation or ADSEG, basically a jail within a jail. And it's kind of similar to what happens in the free world here, where you see people getting in trouble for perceived, not necessarily, a hate crime per se, but transgressions against transgender individuals or transgender identifying individuals.
Wrong thing.
Wrong thing. Yes, perfect. So it's that sort of thing. There's the legal aspect of it, but there's also just, what we're dealing with here are vicious domestic abusers in some cases, people who've lost their humanity and who aren't afraid to physically taunt women. And sadly, the women are sitting ducks, and most of the women who are actually incarcerated in California they have either been battered or beaten. They've been subjected to some sort of sexual abuse in their past. They're trying to rehabilitate themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're being forcibly housed with, in some cases, and in most of these cases, intact male inmates. So it's placing them in this consistent situation of reliving their trauma. And so how is someone supposed to rehabilitate themselves? It causes complex PTSD. It really makes any sort of rehabilitation difficult for these women. And, as people in the free world, we should care about inmates actually being able to rehabilitate and get back into society and become productive, positive members of our culture.
Yeah, it's the whole point of this is not just punitive, but allowing someone to find a second chance at life, which is what you see in the first episode with Jennifer. You could tell that she's smart, that she's capable, that she's going to emerge with the potential to be a good citizen, and despite her crimes and despite what she suffered along the way. And I also think that the abuse you're talking about is probably widespread. This series is looking at California specifically. How common is this across the country at this point? Are many jails or prisons using similar practices, or is it more restricted to California and a few other states?
What we're discovering is that, as you probably know, California is ground zero for a lot of bad policy decisions that start to spread across the nation. California, in terms of culture, is just ground zero for several things that take over the nation, and policy is one of them. Now, it wasn't necessarily the first, and it certainly won't be the last to adopt these types of woke policies. We're seeing it in different states, New York, New Jersey, but you also see it in other places. We're investigating Washington state. There's some stuff going on in Texas in federal prisons. So it's not just state prisons, but this is also a big issue actually globally. In California specifically, around 30 to 35% of male inmates are registered sex offenders, but in Great Britain that spikes to 75% of the transgender. 75% of the transgender identified inmates are registered sex offenders, and so there's a lot that is obviously not being reported from behind bars. It's not just America. It's any place in the world that is kowtowing to these woke ideologies that just does not want to admit that there are genuine reasons why you should keep men and women separate.
There's a chilling segment of the first episode of Cruel and Unusual Punishment that suggests that there are some trans women in the system who are posing, who once they've essentially gotten in, they've tricked the system, as it were, they revert to their male selves. Is that something that you've seen beyond a single anecdote? Is that something that's happening more often, you think?
I've heard this sort of anecdote from several women now. This is one thing that Jennifer does touch in a little bit with her documentary episode that I detail in a written article that accompanies the documentary. How she was telling me about how there was one man who had came to her facility, Central California Women's Facility. This is one of only 2 women's facilities out of the 34 prisons in California, right? There's only 2, and all of the rest are men's. So this one man had come to Central California Women's Facility. He was wearing feminine clothing, makeup, wore his hair in pigtails, and after a few months, he cut his hair and he started wearing masculine clothes again, and he got a girlfriend. There have also been reports, and these are anecdotes. These aren't reports that I have, other than one PRA response, which is still in the works for investigating. We've seen reports of people getting pregnant, and it's not just the pregnancies, it's domestic violence. There's a lot going on.
Yeah. Well, let's ask what will sound like a dumb question, but Why documentaries? Why would IDWF go in this direction at this point? I'm very curious about that because I'm seeing it across the board right now for, I could say, libertarian, right-leaning, outfits that don't sort of follow the narrative, for lack of a better phrase. But what made your group, you decide to go in this direction?
Well, over at Independent Women's Forum, we've been diving into a lot more video storytelling, because it is a really strong way to get people to understand policy in a way that it's so much more accessible than just words on a screen. Words on a screen are amazing. That's my primary form of communication in terms of writing articles, and whether it's for IWF or for EV Magazine. Trust me, nothing wrong with writing, but visuals really do help people understand the issues. It humanizes the issues. And it's especially important for something like talking about prisons, where people don't actually know really what it looks like. They understand what Orange is the New Black looks like. They understand what Shawshank Rebellion looks like, but they don't know what actual carceral settings look like. So being able to show, and especially being able to show the people who are affected, whether it's Jennifer, whether it's Amy, whether it's some of the gentlemen that we've spoken with, former prison guards, visual storytelling is really quite important. And I think it's a niche, especially on the conservative side of things, that needs to be explored more. It's something that Independent Women's Forum has been doing through a couple other video series. My colleague, who's the co-producer on this series with me, she started one with Independent Women's Forum before I was a part of the organization, called Identity Crisis. And she was on the forefront of a lot of the stories about detransitioners, about the mothers of detransitioners as well. It's just, there's something to be said about being able to put words on screen in a way that humanizes the issue.
Absolutely, and it's a powerful step for sure. It's necessary, and I think we have to reach people in different ways as well. It could be a podcast, it could be a written story, it could be a docu-series. Now, the first episode is on YouTube. It's available there. Now, I would imagine you could have put this behind a paywall. You could have said you have to pay X for each episode. You could have teamed them all together. So why YouTube? Is this something that you need to get out there as much as possible, and hopefully the costs will not be, so overwhelming that you can't proceed? I was kind of curious about the release strategy behind this.
It's a great question, because I can completely understand paywalls. With content, it can be expensive to produce. There's a lot at stake. But for us, the most important thing was getting the message out, because we're really focused on advocacy and awareness for this issue. Our organization is all about advocacy and awareness to make sure that people are actually informed about how policy issues impact them, and that can help them guide themselves into, voting for the right person eventually, or supporting ballot measures that may be in their states, or not supporting those ballot measures. So really just keeping these things outside of a paywall is in our best interest for engaging and informing not only women, but men as well. Obviously, Independent Women's Forum is not exclusive to women. My apologies.
When you think about what you're doing now and some of the recent projects you've done, you would think on paper, well, I'd have to go out to Hollywood. I have to hire these directors and filmmakers and producers and all these different very specifically talented individuals. But, I'm seeing the Daily Caller is doing this. I'm seeing, independent filmmakers are going this direction. Now, IWF is going here as well. How hard is it to make that shift? Because I watched the first episode. I thought it looked clean. It looked professional. It didn't look amateurish. It looked like any docu-style series that I've seen. So, obviously you're hitting the ground running, but how is it just that the fact that technology is so available, it's so economically available as well? Just talk about that transition. I'm curious about that.
No, it's a great question. My colleague, Kelsey Bolar, who's the director of storytelling at Independent Women's Forum, has a pretty long history, not only of reporting, but also of producing video content. And I've learned so much from her. working directly with her on this series, working with her on Identity Crisis, on some of the female athlete stories that we had broke, like last year, the story about Kim Russell, the former Oberlin College lacrosse coach. It's, I'd say it's also the advent of things like YouTube, where a lot more people have the access to, whether it's something like Adobe to get, or whether it's a Windows Movie Maker, iMovie. I mean, even I toyed around with that sort of stuff growing up because I'm just part of this generation that has more access to the digital tools to tell stories through videos. I think it's also, you see so many people on YouTube who make these long documentaries just for fun. And I think it's beautiful, actually, that content is not exclusive to Hollywood showrunners. And with that, we can see so many more perspectives and we can see so much more personality as well.
That's a great point. It's fun. I've joked about this in the past, although it's not really a joke. When I go to bed often, I will put on some Sam the Cooking Guy videos. He's just a chef. He has videos. But you know what? The production values are top-notch. He's engaging and funny and a little kind of a wiseacre. But that's something that wouldn't exist a decade or so. Now he's out there. He's producing his content. I'm sure he's pretty successful based on his view counts. But it is amazing, the democratization of this format, of this forum, where anyone really with for you, it was working with a colleague who had more skill, and you're now up to speed. It is wonderful to see. Couple last questions. When you think about what you'd like to tackle next, there are so many conversations happening in the culture. Have you picked a new topic, or are you sort of so enmeshed in what you're doing right now that has to continue with that?
Well, I'll give you a little teaser since
Sure.
I know we're just a couple days out from the launch of it. I can't say whether or not it'll end up being a video series, but we are about to embark on a storytelling project about telling the stories of female dissidents.
Mm-hmm.
So people escaping authoritarian rules and regimes. And it's a storytelling series we're very excited about because it really demonstrates why American values need to be preserved, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And by the way, the work you're doing is sort of in-house, you could say. But once this docuseries, it's all wrapped up and it's available on YouTube, would your team consider knocking on the door of a Netflix, a Hulu, an Amazon Prime and saying, hey, we could package this for you and you could add it to your documentary lineup? Have you tried that, or would you even consider that?
We have not tried that to my knowledge. And it would be interesting to know if they would even be friendly to our type of content. I might have to try that out though, Christian, and get back to you and see if they're even responsive. I know there are other platforms that are much more willing to cater to these types of messages that are so important to get out there. But different streaming platforms that have really just, they're run by abundantly woke individuals. I don't know if they would respond positively because what we're telling is sadly antithetical to their content.
I don't disagree. I also think it's possible, especially in the documentary format, that they may be more amenable to these kinds of stories. But you're right. There is a reason why a lot of people like yourself have to do this independently or with an organization like you have, where you can have the backing and have the support and be able to share what you share. And if you find out things that are inconvenient, well, you can just share those things because that's what's happening. That's the anecdote you're hearing. That's a story that you're learning about. So really interesting. But thank you, Andrea, for joining the show. The new docuseries is called Cruel and Unusual Punishment. The first episode's out now on YouTube. You also can go to iwf.org/cruel and unusual. You can find it there as well, or just do the old Google search or YouTube search. You will find it. The first episode is only 8 minutes, but it's jam-packed with good information, shocking at times, but necessary too. And I thank you so much for producing these kinds of shows. I love that you've taken this storytelling aspect. It makes me smile that your colleague is the director of storytelling. Just the fact that a title like that exists in this world is wonderful. And I hope we can talk again about other projects.
Thank you so much, Christian. I look forward to the next time we can chat.
I admit I don't do a lot of movie reviews here on the Hitcast. Usually save them for my website, HollywoodInToto.com. Second plug. But I am making an exception this week. There's a new film out. It's called Cabrini, and it opens nationwide March 8th. By the way, that's also my mom's birthday and Mickey Dolenz' birthday. Mickey, happy 79th. Mom, I know not to give your age. I'm a gentleman. Now, Cabrini is the story of Mother Cabrini. She was an Italian nun who refused to quit when everyone, and we mean everyone, screamed at her that she should do just that. She stood up to the Pope, bigoted New Yorkers, you name it, everyone. They just didn't stand a chance against her. Just too much fortitude, too much willingness to do whatever it takes to get things done. And of course, for her, getting things done meant creating hospitals and orphanages for the poor. She helped out so many people over the years, and this is essentially her origin story. Starts in the Big Apple, and it's almost like a superhero in a way, because when she's dressed up in her nun's habit, anything is possible. Now, I have to say, this is old school storytelling. It's sweet, it's profound, it's inspiring, absolutely. Cristiana Dell'Anna is superb as Mother Cabrini, and if this isn't one of the most beautifully shot films in 2024, I can't imagine many topping it. It is gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. And yes, this is a faith-based story from Angel Studios, but it's smart, it's savvy, it doesn't have that faith-based feel that movies used to have. Boy, this genre is really growing by leaps and bounds. Now, I saw it being a screening link, which means I watched on my laptop, and I did kick it to my monitor, so I had a bigger screen than just a small laptop visual, but I kind of regret it. A film that looks as beautiful as Cabrini, you got to see it on the big screen, and I hope I get a chance to catch up with it one day. But for now, this weekend, I'd say give Cabrini a look. And let me know what you think. You can always reach me on Twitter, or X as some people now call it. Just go to @HollywoodInToto and let me know. I hope you like it. And if you don't, well, art is subjective. I don't know. Let her rip. I got thick skin. Oh, and about that Pulp Fiction question. The great Adam West danced the Batusi on, what else? Batman, the great campy classic TV show from the 60s. And during Pulp Fiction, in a pivotal scene, John Travolta and Uma Thurman both copied Adam West's moves on the dance floor. Groovy, baby. All right, that's another show in the proverbial can. Thank you to Radio America for having me as part of their great podcast lineup. And while I have your attention, please drop by HollywoodInToto.com, your third and final plug of the week. It is updated 7 days a week, and this is our 10-year anniversary. No presents, no letters, just drop on by. It is the right take on entertainment, and it's woke-free since 2014. I'll see you next time.